Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2016, presents INTERPHEX Live.
We're going to be, topic is medicine authenticity from seed to solution with leaps in cannabis progress. Anybody that's older than 30 years old will realize that this has been something we've been discussing on our end in the pharmaceutical business. However, I got two great speakers here, Leslie Boxar and Pam Johnston will be talking. And we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. However, I do have a battery of questions that I want to get through so we get everything out there. All right? And so my first question is, and I'm sure we've discussed this a couple of times, but so Les, what is medical marijuana? Let's start with that, and then we'll go to where is with it. How's that?
Okay, so the overarching answer is that medical marijuana is a phenomenon that has been pushing policy change around the world because the illegality on a federal basis in the United States and other jurisdictions has been able to keep it out of testing or any type of pharmaceutical or other research. As a result, when we started to finally see that that policy didn't make any sense, and states like California, Nevada, Oregon, and others started passing medical marijuana laws, it established a classification for marijuana or cannabis use that was for therapeutic benefit, but not subject to the traditional FDA guidelines of approval. And so we've done that here in the US. We've been pushing that more. A couple of other countries have been looking at it as well. There's medical marijuana in a few other jurisdictions, and places like Canada and others have been doing a better job. But the short answer is medical marijuana is a phenomenon that's taken place to sort of push policy shift to a place based upon reason, actual data, and having sensible policy.
Well, and in addition, one of the ways that we consider medical marijuana when you talk about it is as if it's a generic, and it's not. Because there's actually compounds within the cannabis plant that create all different kinds of medicine. So cannabis medicine is actually many, many, many things that are made up of different compounds of cannabis plants. So we could be talking about THC, CBD, trichomes, terpenes, cannabinoids, about 100 or so more cannabinoids. So what we're seeing in medical marijuana are very symptom-specific breeding of strains to treat very specific symptoms. So you'll start seeing not just cannabis for everything, cannabis for epilepsy, cannabis for cancer, cannabis for glaucoma. You're going to see cannabis for a migraine headache, cannabis for PMS, cannabis to enhance your sexual arousal or desire, cannabis for every possible symptom for which the plant has been proven effective. And slowly but surely, not just anecdotally, but clinically, we're seeing the symptoms for which cannabis has been proven effective grow. So the amount of ailments for which cannabis is proving effective is growing and growing.
Okay, I get that part. Let's get back to the what it, is this national or is it state? I mean, what are we, so is this dealt with from us on a state level? Because we're used to, when we go to FDA, we're talking about the country. How can we, just help me out there? So, you know, we want to have a real good vision of this one, so.
Well, in the United States, it's quite a patchwork of policy and regulation. Internationally, as Leslie said, there are some countries who are actually far ahead of us, predominantly in research and development because, for example, in Israel or Canada, where the scheduling of the drug is not federally illegal for medical, allowing much stronger, more advanced medical research to be taking place. Do you want to?
Sure, and then, so in the United States, the first state to legalize medical marijuana was California. A number of other states in the West followed suit. Currently, there are 24 states that have medical marijuana laws on the books right now. The last one to pass anything was the state of Pennsylvania just last week. And every state's regulatory framework is different and their policy is different. And they're all in conflict with the federal policy, which says that marijuana is still Schedule 1. But to once again answer your question, it's a patchwork of different regulations, on a state-by-state basis, and the FDA is not involved in any of them.
Well, it seems to me one of the big, and again, this is something, how do we not get past the Schedule 1 thing? I mean, what is that? I mean, what's the, you help, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Sure.
the Schedule 1
Sure.
seems to be, that should be the easiest thing to fix. Maybe I'm stupid. Help me out.
Okay, so, cannabis was established as illegal back in 1933, 34 under the Marijuana Tax Act, which was started by Harry Anslinger, he was the director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Then it was added to the Controlled Substances list in the Controlled Substances Act in the 70s, and it's currently a Schedule 1. How do we get around that? Is that the scheduling of it on Schedule 1 is implausible. It makes no sense based upon the data. And so very likely what we're going to see is in 5 to 6 years, we'll see it descheduled so it is treated like alcohol or coffee or tobacco, and that drugs developed based upon cannabis will go through the FDA process for approval like other drugs are, but as an actual plant-based therapy or adult use compound, it will be regulated like alcohol.
It's interesting. So where are we at with this? I mean, where are we at with this whole Schedule 1 debate? I mean, is there, who's leading the charge on this thing?
Well,
if I'm off the mark on
No,
these
no,
questions,
no,
No,
it's a great
you're
question.
on the mark.
It's a great question.
Last week, if we're reading the news, there was the United Nations meeting on drug policy, and we're seeing some hopeful movement because our DEA has actually approved a government-funded study on medical cannabis for PTSD for our veterans. So that's a nice step forward. But despite the fact that we have clinical studies not only here in the United States and around the world, it really is about time, and we think that the pharmaceutical and the nutraceutical industries can actually help understand the science and push the policy so that our patients can have access and that the medical efficacy is not something that's denied by our government.
That's right. And then the last thing I'll say, currently, you may know that Bernie Sanders, who's the senator who's running for president, proposed descheduling it. Hillary Clinton has discussed rescheduling it. Senators Booker and Rand proposed a bill that would end up resulting in the movement of it to Schedule 2 with special treatment. So the conversation has begun about removing it from Schedule 1, and I believe within 5 years it will be descheduled, not rescheduled, or rescheduled so far down the list that it can be handled intelligently.
just out of when was it bumped up to Schedule 1? I mean, it was there. You know, there was actually pharmaceuticals out there. I worked in an ancient pharmacy in Hoboken, New Jersey, which, by the way, had marijuana cigarettes in stock. It used to be common treatment for asthma. Honest to God, right? I mean, so when did the Schedule 1 thing hit the skids? I mean, when did that come up?
I believe it was under Richard Nixon with the establishment of the Controlled Substances Act.
Okay,
And that there was a recent comment by one of Nixon's advisors, Ehrlichman, that said that they moved it to the Schedule 1 for political reasons, not based on any science.
I got you. All right, let's try to get some. I find that part fascinating because it's so alien to what we understand as an industry. But let's talk about the science a minute. Okay, what I'm hearing is disease or disease state specificity. All right, what kind of science are we doing to get that? In other words, this is good for that. This is good, and understand, is that by plant species or is that by extract from the plants? You understand my question now? If each plant's got 8 compounds, are we qualifying all 8? Are we qualifying extract? So where are we going with the science? Let's start with that.
Okay, so currently, because the research on the plant is really just beginning, because of its classification as Schedule 1, you couldn't even do research for the last 70 years. What we're starting to see is that there are apparently 80 plus, some people say as many as hundreds of cannabinoids present in the plant throughout all of its different species or strains. There's some 1,500 current strains that I have been told about. There may be many more than that. Additionally, there are terpenes that exist in the plant and terpene profiles, combinations of terpenes, which are the compounds that give scent, that give flavor to it. And so, like limonene, which is in citrus, etc.
Myrcene, limonene,
Yes.
caryophyllene.
Yes. And so all of those are present in the plant as well. So the question you're asking is, we're learning about that. And what we're finding is that the different cannabinoids have different effects. For example, one of the ones that Pamela mentioned, THCV, tetrahydrocannabivarin, is currently being explored for effect on treating diabetes or treating type 2 diabetes. It's affecting appetite, it's affecting glucose modulation, and it's also affecting insulin resistance. And obviously that's a very big issue. And so the answer to your question short was there's many different, hundreds of different compounds, and they're all being explored for effect. Many of them are being found to have effect, and many of them are being found to have an effect in something called the ensemble or
entourage effect.
That's right.
Okay, so by that, you mean that we're not extracting that specific alkaloid and doing a clinical study, but we're looking at as the whole,
Both.
Both.
We're doing
Okay,
both.
good.
Both, and in fact, you're hearing a lot about cannabis treatments for epilepsy. We've heard a lot of human interest stories. We're hearing a lot about other, for AIDS, cancer, the list goes on. But what we're learning as the discoveries come about are the things that you're not hearing about. So when we talk about THCV, and he says it's a big deal, we're talking about, in the United States in 2012, $245 billion economic impact from diabetes alone. 245 million, and almost billion, and then 500
Billion
in treatment and spending. So if we look at just the smallest percentage of impacting that market, you start to look at every different bucket for every different type of ailment that cannabis may or may not have effectiveness for. So in THCV in specific, because it's newer and you're not hearing a lot about it, it's really where a larger part of the, let's call it the mass market, not the hospital market, not the physician market, and whether it's over the counter and patients being able to self-select for themselves from an over-the-counter nutraceutical that has global mass appeal, not just a very specific or a synthetic product.
Okay, so, you know, if it's a nutraceutical and it's something that's not covered by a prescription, the docs come down with, you know what, I want you to do 4,000 units of vitamin D, I want you to take 3 units of fish oil. So where are the docs coming down, and what advice do they give people with these afflictions? Let's just say I come in and I have diabetes or stress, or, you know, I'm sorry, there was a stress syndrome that was specific.
PTSD.
Yeah, okay. So how do docs come down on this lesson?
So currently, the way it works is because it's on the Schedule 1, you can't actually write a prescription. So a doctor cannot issue technically a prescription of what to use. But what they're doing is they have found a mechanism to be able to recommend it. So they'll issue a letter of recommendation, and as much as they have information about it, they'll recommend trying maybe CBD for certain issues, THC for others. For example, depending upon what type of epilepsy you have, you can experience, what I'm told from people who've directly used it, remarkable results, reducing seizures from multiple a day to 0 on a weekly basis through the use of cannabis-based therapies that use THC and or CBD. But some types of epilepsy respond better to CBD-based treatments, some respond better to THC-based treatments. So the answer is, it's incumbent upon the doctors to start getting educated so they can understand what to recommend rather than just a general recommendation. But to touch on one thing that the doctors are dealing with, we have a prescription painkiller epidemic in the United States. We just, everybody read about the artist Prince, or formerly known as Prince, passing recently, and the fact that he may have had an issue with prescription painkillers. The Journal of the American Medical Association found in 2014, August, that in states that have medical marijuana, there's been a reduction in prescription painkiller overdose deaths by 24.7%. So the answer to your question once again is the doctors are doing the research, they're starting to find out what things that they can recommend it for, and there's a whole list of recommendations, and it has not gotten that specific yet where they can say specifically take this strain for that, unless you are talking about Tikkun Olam, which is an Israeli medical marijuana company that has been conducting clinical studies for over a decade to recommend specific strains for specific ailments, and they actually have had real results.
They have 10 years of patient data, and they're actually doing symptom-specific strain breeding. So let's use cancer as an example. There would be a different strain for attacking a tumor and a different strain for chemotherapy-induced nausea.
Okay, let's, and again, what I try to, because I'm not, I have a head, I'm trying to get my head around it the way, so anyway, if we're going to make something from a natural compound, right, we either make a tincture, we make an extract, and that's usually that's what the patient is given. And we're not specific, it's an extract of that plant. We don't go into, so my first question is, what is the patient, the doc says you got to take, I recommend this, or what is he given? I mean,
It's a recommendation. So what the patient has as their next decision when they're at a purchasing environment, typically a dispensary, is a myriad of products, sublinguals, patches, oils that you can vape, flour that you can vape or smoke. There's edibles for medical, a lot of medicinal edibles. And there are also suppositories as well as some very interesting new metered dose, dependable, consistent metered dose inhalers.
Yes, and so for example, one of the things that Pam mentions, there's currently a former pharmaceutical scientist in the Bay Area who's been working on developing the first pressurized measured dose inhaler for cannabis. So there will be able to not just be a recommendation that you should go use it, vaporize it through vaporized flour or vaporized extracts, take tinctures, take sprays, sublingual patches, sublingual strips, transdermal patches, but now there will be more modalities available, such as measured dose inhalers. We've heard about intranasal, measured dose, and more. So it's just at the beginning. Very soon, a lot of the businesses that are at this show are going to be looking into manufacturing or providing tools for people who are manufacturing specifically for remedies that are based on the cannabis plant.
it's, and again, coming from where I'm in the industry, like a transdermal patch is not a casual dosage form. I mean, that means somebody formulated, developed, and there's a significant infrastructure out there making it. So what's the commercial? It sounds to me like there's a groundswell of commercial support on this side. I mean, obviously we're a commercialization in the science. So the answer is, these people want to, where do I get into the, if this is a growing market, where is the commercialization and what is it? Maybe you can give me, can you provide insight on that? I mean, if I'm off the, again, if I'm off the mark, just let me know.
It's a great question, and it's something, a couple of interesting facts most people don't know. The legal cannabis industry is the fastest growing business in the United States right now. There's more job creation in the legal cannabis industry than any other industry in the country currently. And so it's now in the billions, 5 billion approximately, medical and regulated marijuana last year, expected to be somewhere between 20 and 40 billion a year, if you believe the different reports that have come out by 2020. And to give you an idea of scale, if you combine the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA together, that represents 35 billion a year in revenue. The legal cannabis industry by 2020 will surpass essentially all major league sports in terms of its size. So there's a tremendous groundswell of support and demand, which is why people are exploring all these more sophisticated delivery systems.
And that doesn't even include hemp.
Right. Well, again, we're not talking about the other obvious, we're not talking about rope or recycled. We're talking about the medicinal, pharmaceutical aspect of it. And so it just blows my mind to understand that, somebody says, okay, I need to get a transdermal of, I don't know, Delta 9 or whatever. The answer is somebody has to extract it, somebody formulates it, and that's going to be the same level of business if I go out tomorrow to formulate a drug for anything on the other side of the industry. So that's got to be significant commercial opportunity.
Oh, absolutely.
So, how come we don't, am I being stupid? How come we don't hear a lot about that? What is that,
I'll let you take it.
Go. So, for example, I mentioned the one company, Island Breeze, making the pressurized measured dose inhalers. And there was a lot of research that went into it. I mean, this is a scientist who was formerly with a business that got acquired for $1.3 billion, formerly a senior scientist at Novartis, and apparently the only scientist to ever be able to combine 3 active pharmaceutical ingredients in the same pressurized measured dose inhaler. He went and spent a year plus doing research to be able to get to the point where he could create this product. Why? Because very quickly you can start to see the revenues that justify it, and it's able to provide real relief to people in many ways. Plus, when you look at the fact that you compare cannabis to any of the other substances that are out there being used for therapeutic benefit, and you look at the number of deaths or injuries from it on a yearly basis, cannabis has been consistent for the last few years and has had the exact same number of deaths from overdose. 0. As compared to things like aspirin, which have had 1,000 people that have died from taking aspirin in the last year. So the
Aspirin
answer is,
wouldn't get approved today.
yes.
No, it wouldn't.
And so the answer is that people are currently doing the research to be able to come up with these more sophisticated modalities of delivery, and you're going to see more of them as time goes by.
All right, so are there clinical studies, Les, or Pam? I mean, we're all about controlled environment studies, so what's going on?
Absolutely. There's a website that I'd recommend, EYBNA. We use it all the time. It has the most up-to-date, all current and past studies. You even has a nice little search tool so you can search by symptom or ailment. The most recent, do you want to cover?
Yeah, and so EBNA is an Israeli company that has been researching the terpenes that are in the cannabis plant and the effects therapeutically that they have. And along the way, they have put together a library, as Pam mentioned, of studies that cover everything from post-traumatic stress disorder to glaucoma, obviously, to many different types of cancer treatment symptoms, then epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and more. So as we start to look...
Anxiety, insomnia.
That's correct. And so there's a whole universe of conditions that cannabis is currently being used to treat around the world, particularly in areas that have not been handicapped the way we have in doing research, like Israel. Israel has been making leaps and bounds. They discovered THC in Israel. They first isolated CBD in Israel. And some of the greatest technological advances in this area are coming out of Israel. I mentioned Tikkun Olam and EBNA. Both of those, Pamela mentioned EBNA, both of those are Israeli companies.
So, what are the things? So, okay, you touched on the international dimension. So, is Israel like that? They're leading the pack here, or what is it?
On a research and development standpoint, absolutely. And then my guess would also say the same for intellectual property.
So, like, at this stage of the game, should this become an industry? They're going to eat our lunch? Is what pretty much what's going to happen, or?
Well, I don't know that they're going to eat our lunch, but they've certainly gotten a little bit of a head start, and we shouldn't discount that. I think it's very important that we start to see some real shifts here in the U.S., and we've begun to see them. To be clear, what Pam mentioned, the first ever study authorized by the DEA on cannabis just began with Dr. Sue Sisley, who's going to be studying cannabis for PTSD. And so that was the first time the DEA actually authorized the study of it, as well as the study utilizing people who are able to just smoke it as part of the study. So yes, they could eat our lunch if we don't really start making some headway, and we've begun to, and we need to do a lot more.
So right now the intent is not just, it's the holistic, I don't want to use holistic, it's the whole plant, everything in it.
Whole plant therapies. I think whole plant juicing of cannabis is going to be one of the things that you start seeing a lot of, and the use of all whole plant therapies. I actually think there's going to be a little bit of rebellion against the synthetics, and it's based on the data. It's based on the reactions that patients are having. And if we look at movements in other areas of wellness, whole plant-based therapies are not new. And for cannabis to be looked at as a vegetable, as a medicinal plant, we've already seen companies who are having great effects, thousands and thousands of patients reporting really strong benefits and results just from whole plant juicing of cannabis.
Correct. And then to go a little bit more on that same area, the fact is whole plant is part of it, Russ, but we're also seeing isolates and then combinations, and we're going to see a huge industry based on the ingredients that can be drawn out of the plant. EBNA has been looking at terpenes, and after they find the terpenes in the plant, they then look at what other plants have those same terpenes, so you can look at the most effective way at extracting. For example, myrcene, which was mentioned earlier, is present in cannabis, mangoes, and hops. And so you can extract that from any one of those once you know what it is and what it does. So short answer, whole plant therapy and isolated and blended therapies utilizing the plant as a source of ingredients.
Yeah, and then to even take that on to more blended therapies, we're going to see combinations of compounds that are part cannabis, part something that already exists. So now imagine Advil plus, percentage of CBD, a little bit of THCV, and maybe some myrcene. You're going to start seeing all different kinds of existing medications now combined with different recipes of these terpenes and cannabinoids, and people are patenting them. They're actually, terpene recipes are being patented and used to, I guess, treat all kinds of different symptoms. And you see it in edibles, you see it in smokables, and you're going to start to see this mixture of what is believed to be the next remedy. So instead of a sleeping pill or a Tylenol PM, it's going to be a cannabis with Tylenol.
Yes, for example, I'll say one thing to that. There's a couple of companies that have already started to explore things like combining cannabis with melatonin, cannabis with caffeine, and other things like that to see what the effects can be. And so there are many different innovations that are going, and we've just begun. I sort of liken this to the discovery of penicillin by Lord Alexander Fleming, and at first it was just mold in a Petri dish, but now it's a gigantic industry with many, many different derivatives and methods of delivery, et cetera. And cannabis is just at the very beginning. It's not mold in a Petri dish, but it's not that different in terms of where it is in the life cycle of the industry.
Right. I think part of it is because everybody, I think, correct me, I mean, everybody listens to what you're saying, but in the back of their head, they snicker because it's got all the other baggage that comes along with it. But the answer to here, it's legitimate. We're talking about legitimate results. Let me ask you this. Speaking legitimacy, let's talk about what is a dose? I mean, what's a dose? I mean, we talk. I think enlighten the group here.
Sure. So that pressurized measured dose inhaler that I mentioned, it typically delivers 3 milligrams per puff of the extract that is in there. And then the actual active part of that delivery turns out to be about 700 micrograms. So not even 1 milligram, if I remember correctly. Now, on the other end, there are people that are using things like Rick Simpson oil and other types of extracts where they may be taking THC as one of the active compounds, CBD as another compound in there, can be in the hundreds of milligrams per day, maybe 500 milligrams or even a gram a day of the extract for people that are very, very, very ill in terms of the pure extract. So anywhere between there from half a milligram, 700 micrograms through an inhaled drug to orally delivering 250 milligrams and up for people who are using it for very serious therapies when they're going through chemotherapy, radiation therapy, or things like that.
So it sounds to me like the sub-milligram, or as we would consider it, the highly potent stuff, or the extracts.
Yes.
The whole plant, whatever we want to call it, is, we're talking hundreds or...
Much more mild. I believe that the National Institute of Health sent out, they would send out 300 cannabis cigarettes to the different patients who had signed up to the National Institute of Health to be part of a study, and they were given 300 for 1 month, so essentially 10 a day.
Right. So is there again, we talked about there's been 0 deaths. Has there been any long-term toxicity studies other than the fact that people aren't dropping dead in the street? I mean, has there been a study, an actual tox study? Or?
So it is non-toxic, hence the 0%, 0 deaths per year. I mean, it's just non-toxic. You can eat it, and it have to be into the kilograms before you'd start to actually notice an effect. It would be impractical to be able to do. Plus, in the plant itself, it's not even psychoactive. So when it's in the plant form, it's actually delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, as opposed to the delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which has been decarboxylated to make it psychoactive. As the acid, it's not even active. So, once again, the answer is no toxicity that anyone has been able to find. There are, obviously, if you're smoking a lot, you should be careful. If you're going to be doing anything in a very large amount, you need to pay attention. But other than that, there has been no negative associated with it from a toxicology viewpoint.
I got it. So is it considered a prodrug then in certain cases?
A what?
Prodrug, right? Am I reading it wrong? I mean, bottom line is, if you take the drug in in the state it exists, has no therapeutic or pharmacological effect. It has to be ingested or transferred to the active form. So in a lot of cases, what you have going on is a prodrug, right?
I suppose, although there are some questions about other of the cannabinoids being active, if not psychoactive, in the body and having a mechanism of action through what we're now discovering, which is the endocannabinoid system. That's only been in the last 30 years
Yes.
that it's been discovered, and how that regulates many aspects of our body. So the CB1,
CB2 receptors.
that's right, make a big difference.
All right, let me, these are actually, Pam, you and I, we talked about a couple of these things. So, Nabilone, can you help me out there? What are we
Sure,
talking?
there's a couple of synthetics on the market, and people have read about them, and they're also, I would say, they cost a fortune, and they're not producing the same types of results without the side effects of the whole plant therapies. So there are a couple of drugs out there, and there are people who are experiencing very good effects of using them, but we are proponents of whole plant therapies, and we think that they'll win out over synthetics over a very short period of time. So Marinol, Nabiline, Sativex,
Dronabinol. And then there was that study in France that had things go very wrong, where they were actually looking at synthetic cannabinoids and trying to affect the endocannabinoid system. That's right.
So where do I get the data? I mean, we have databases. We go to PubMed. We go to, there's clinical databases. I mean, there's stuff we pay for. Where are the data? If I wanted to start, say, this sounds like a business I got to start to drill into, where do I get my information from?
Well, first, there's a lot of education about the endocannabinoid system that I would recommend. There's a lot of good reading. Once you have the basic science, I would be looking at some of the industry companies that are far ahead of where our government agencies are, because our DEA, when they send out marijuana for medical testing, they don't even know or track what strain it is. So I would say that we really want to focus on studies that will bring about new understanding, because the synthetics that have a lot of the pharma dollars behind them are getting more attention than the things you're not hearing about, and the patient efficacy and the side effects are quite clear in the whole plant-based therapies.
And so, yes, Pam pointed out EBNA and their database that they have of about, I want to say, 25 different studies that have been done. Tikkun Olam has some data on their website as well about the studies that they've done. And then right now, there is no single data repository like PubMed that has all of it in one place. Maybe that's something that needs to be started, that sort of takes all of the data out there and puts it in one place so that it can be accessible to people who are looking to get into the industry or find out more about it.
There was a science, well, there still is a science. A couple of the universities still are active with it, Duquesne University for one, It was actually the study of natural products. It used to be pharmacognosy was the science at the time. That's the only reason I was aware of the Delta 9 work, because that was something that was worked on back in the mid 70s, early 70s. But that was something that was, and again, I believe that was that was like a federal grant, Institute of Health. I think they were trying to come to grips with it. I don't think it had any clinical significance. I think obviously they, it was back. We're trying to understand what the stuff was. But it seems to me that based on what you're saying, the data has got to be everywhere but where it can be looked at. I mean, one of our things is at least we collect the data. So what I'm trying to, in our industry, we have certain norms. And if we're going to get on board, just where do I go? Where do I talk?
As
Who do I
Leslie said,
talk to?
we're at the early stages. In fact, we
Yeah.
need more people to be collecting data and to be seeking those grants and putting the pressure on the organizations who control the studies.
Okay, so let's just say, and I'll say it out loud. So I happen to have a transdermal facility, and I got a whole lot of downtime. So I want to be in the game. So what do I do?
Great question. So it depends upon the state you're in, because if you had that transdermal facility and you were in Mississippi, you're probably going to be much less likely to be able to do anything with it that has anything to do with cannabis than if you were, let's say, in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, California, Nevada, and the list goes on. So if you're in the right location, then you can look to someone who has an existing license or to get a license from the state to become a producer, and then set up your own facility to start producing in that facility. If you had a facility doing that already, very likely you're going to be looked at extremely favorably by those states who are looking to give those licenses out, because the people who are currently looking to get the licenses don't have those types of facilities that they're willing to put to work on it. The other thing is, you could get involved in the making perhaps of transdermal patches for using CBD, although I don't know where the FDA would fall on that once you start shipping it across state lines.
Right.
So I would say take advantage of the enforcement priorities that have been issued by the federal government regarding the state regulated markets, and only look to do business in a state that has a regulated market by getting a license from that state to do it within their structure.
So let me ask you this then. So in a state, that's the same thing as doing compounding. As long as I don't ship it, I'm subject to the Board of Pharmacy rules in that state. Is that kind of the way it's working here? Or is there somebody else engaged?
It's state by state.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where are the credentials? You see what I'm saying? So in that state, let's pick it, California. Does the Board of Pharmacy oversee the making of these things?
Wow.
Who does that?
That's that's a question with a very complex answer.
Oh, okay.
So the state of California originally passed medical marijuana in 1996.
Yeah.
But they didn't establish a regulated framework until 2015. So for 19 years, it was just in this gray area. In 2015, the legislator passed a trio of bills that all work together that are going to be involving the Department of Agriculture, Health and Human Services, the Board of Equalization, the Liquor Control Board, and more, where they're all going to be involved in different aspects of creating licensing. If you're involved in deliveries, the Department of Transportation might have a say in it. If you're dealing with medical marijuana manufacturing and product approval, Health and Human Services. And so the answer is each state has different things. For example, we have someone here from Oregon who is in the cannabis business, and he deals with two different agencies that I'm aware of, or three. The Oregon Liquor Control Commission, which has been established to cover cannabis for adult use, and then they have another division that's handling for medical marijuana. And so there's a number of the answer is each state has different tools set up and approval agencies set up to handle the licensing.
Well, how about the credentials of the people that deal with it? I mean, are these people at these is there some certification that has to go through, or training? Sounds to me like it's a whole myriad of things you got to know. So how do you make sure they know it?
A lot of training. In fact, the anecdotal word is that the bud tenders behind almost all dispensary counters are far more educated than doctors, and that the majority of the education that's coming to consumers in the states where there's legalization, medical and recreation, is coming from the dispensary.
And so the certification, there is certification that's taking place. For example, in Nevada, to work in the industry, you have to go through a certification process. As well, Americans for Safe Access, ASA, has been working with a number of state agencies throughout the country to establish a certain minimum that people need to understand when they're working with it, et cetera. And so the answer is every state is establishing a different system, and they're evolving as we go. Each state gets to stand on the shoulders of those that went before it. As well, the states aren't just establishing medical marijuana and then that's the end of it. For example, Nevada first passed its medical marijuana law in 2001, then they passed a second law in 2013, and then in 2015, they actually have amended that existing law, and they're expected in 2016 to see adult use be in the ballot box. And so it is a dynamic process with many different levels. And so the certification processes and the level of competency, knowledge, and information that is expected to be wielded in the industry and at the fingertips of those that are participating in it is increasing, and you're seeing the governments respond to that by trying to increase the benchmarks necessary to be in it. As well, they're starting to get more people involved on the government side with the bureaucrats to be able to have intelligent policy so that it's not just, policy without people who understand and have a stake in it.
No. Sounds to me like it's not going to be that easy, but at the same, anything that's state to state, it just, so boards of pharmacy don't seem to get into the act at all here. California is probably one of the most progressive states when it comes to the practice of pharmacy. That's what surprised me, but they're silent on the matter.
Well, there's a reason. Federal licensing. Because of the federal illegality, they're all concerned with their DEA licenses being at risk if they get involved in any way. So they're staying away from it for that reason.
Okay, so you put at risk their pharmacy, so that's why these are separated from your conventional pharmacy.
Correct.
Wow. We really painted ourselves into a corner on some of this stuff. Okay, I got it.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, now let me, so actually I did you a disservice, Les. Tell us why you're, why are you the spokesman here? Why are you, I didn't do the introduction properly. Pam, Les, I apologize.
That's okay.
Sure. So Leslie and I are both with Electrum Partners. We are a company that advises businesses for formation, growth, acceleration, and business protection. We are also in the process of putting together a hedge fund where we invest in cannabis businesses, both touching the plant and ancillary businesses. We're working globally. We have deep experience and expertise, and we're built on a culture that's really all about compassionate care and social justice. So our senior management team really feels strongly about patient access, about the ridiculous incarceration for possession of marijuana and getting prisoners out of jail for crimes related to possession of marijuana, something that actually should be given as medicine, not as punishment. So our company has been formed. We've been around for several years, growing rapidly, and we work in all areas of legal cannabis, recreational and medical, as well as hemp and as well as ancillary businesses, which are everything from technology and real estate, equipment leasing, payment processing, just myriad of industries. And it goes to show that cannabis is not an industry. It's about 100 industries converging over one plant.
That's right. And so I actually got into the business somewhat by accident. I was a native New Yorker, moved to Las Vegas to do research on another industry. While I was there, my wife and I decided to move. We started to do, when I got there, I'd always been sympathetic to the plight of cannabis being illegal. I read the book by Jack Herrera when I was much younger, which was written in the 70s or 80s, called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And I saw that the policy was foolish, but I never thought anything would happen to it. Went out to Nevada. I was living out there. I discovered that that medical marijuana wasn't just that thing they do in California with yoga while they eat granola, that there was actually more to it than that. And so when I did the research on it, what I discovered was the economics of it were extraordinary, the social justice issues were incredible, and the compassionate issues were absolutely beyond the pale. And the convergence of those things in one particular place where you could do something you could believe in being right, that you're bringing compassionate use of something to people that need it desperately, when you're reducing social justice issues like mass incarceration and have it be economically extraordinary at the same time, was a magic moment. And I decided to focus on that to the exclusion of everything else. Formed Electrum Partners. We've been involved in many things, as Pamela said, including trying to work with policymakers on establishing intelligent, business-friendly, and reasonable policy around the country and around the world.
With that, I want to thank everybody. That's it for INTERPHEX Live today. Thank you very much.
Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2016, presents INTERPHEX Live.